fights of 2021. Obviously, there's always big debates there's always a big debate when we discuss things like this, and sometimes, we forget fights. Sometimes fights come across our memory later and say, no, we forgot this one. But in this moment, as I think about my top 5 fights, and I try to really have a good memory through the course of the year, I'm gonna go this way. From 5 to 1, my number 5 fight is actually an undercard fight on the Gervonta Davis versus Pitbull Cruz card on the pay-per-view. It opened up the pay-per-view. It was Sergey Derevyanchenko against Carlos Adames. People sometimes when they think about these kind of lists, they forget about these kind of fights because they weren't main event fights, but this was still a 10-round barn burner. And let me tell you something. I was at that fight. I was at that card. When I saw those two get in the ring, I didn't realize what the undercard was. I really hadn't been paying attention to what the undercard would be. A lot of times these undercards leave a lot to be desired. Whoever shows up in the ring, shows up in the ring. And when I saw those two guys get in the ring, I just knew it was going to be a good fight, man. I mean, Derevyanchenko is never in a bad fight. Adames is always right there, like on the verge of something better. So is Derevyanchenko, technically. So you knew you had two very high-skilled guys. I know Derevyanchenko was an Olympian. I believe Adames was an Olympian as well. So you've got high-skilled guys who excelled in their amateur careers, and they've got a pedigree. To me, Derevyanchenko's always come up just a little short, but he's in some amazing fights. And the reason he's always come up just a little short is because he's had the misfortune of fighting for titles against really, really top elite level guys. Sometimes you fight for a world championship, and the champion is a bit more beatable. In Derevyanchenko's case, he's fought some excellent fighters. Daniel Jacobs, Gennady Golovkin, Jamal Charlo. He's been competitive in all those fights. Generally competitive, put up good fights, been exciting. Carlos Adames as well. He's going into the fight. I believe he had one loss going into the fight. Really had shown a good pedigree and had shown to be the goods. I had actually seen him against Patrick Day. Rest in peace to my buddy Patrick Day. But I knew Adames had a good pedigree and had come up short in a fight. I believe he had one loss going into the fight, but he was still of a top level. So you got two guys who are still at a high level, both hungry because they need to get to a higher level. This is sort of a crossroads matchup. These are the best kind of fights because both guys are not only skilled, but they're also, dare I say, desperate or hungry to achieve more. Because they know they have the potential to achieve more, but they've got to get past one another. So I knew as I watched these guys in there and I watched them get in the ring, I said, man, this is about to be a fight. And sure enough, it was. Really solid give and take fight with a lot of skills. Both guys really, gave it their all, fought in a hungry manner. And that's the thing, when you want to see these kind of fights, you want to see high skills, but you also want to see determined, hungry fighters not giving an inch. And neither guy really gave an inch. At the end of the day, I really thought either guy could have won the fight. It was one of those fights where I remember when the last bell rang thinking, what a shame. Somebody's got to lose in this fight tonight and be punished by having to go a little bit more backwards in their career. Because both of these guys really, I felt like elevated themselves in their performances in this fight. Adames got the nod in a very, very good fight. I look forward to seeing him again. And Derevyanchenko is one of these guys who came out of Eastern Europe with such a big amateur career that he's moved fast. Some of these guys get moved fast. Vasyl Lomachenko's another one, So, and in getting moved that fast, if you come up short a few times, all of a sudden your record looks a little bit stained. And this is why we got to stop judging guys based on wins and losses. I know we always say this, but then we always end up going back to that. Derevyanchenko's record now after the loss is 13-4. But this guy is still a top-level fighter, and he showed it in the Adames fight, and he showed it in every single time he's been in the ring. And Adames himself is a top-level guy who I think with this solid win, with this big win, catapults himself into a possible title shot or a possible big fight, main event status type of level. I look forward to seeing them both. And in an exciting fight, that is my number 5 fight of 2021, Sergey Derevyanchenko against Carlos Adames. My number 4 fight of 2021 is Joseph Parker against Derek Chisora 2. Now, these guys had one fight already. It was a good fight. It was exciting. And they couldn't help themselves. They had to do it again. And man, was this a fight. You don't typically see, in the years of Klitschko, who was a dominant guy who needs to be respected, we didn't get to see these kind of heavyweight fights a lot, But we're starting to see them come up more often, action heavyweight fights. And we're getting spoiled a bit, because we kind of had been had not been spoiled during those years of the Klitschko dominance, who, again, Klitschko to me one of the best heavyweights ever, but just fought in a more cerebral way. Derek Chisora, very respectable, solid contender. Only 2 losses. What does he have? 1 to Dillian White and 1 to AJ, both on points. So really high-level contender, still needs to be respected. Derek Chisora is never in a bad fight. I mean, this guy's getting older. It's funny because he always comes to literally fight. I mean, he's not the most skilled heavyweight, but he's a rugged bully type. And he's a real marauder in there if you're not on his level. I can remember watching him knock out Artur Szpilka, and I was working the fight for Sky Sports, and he knocked him out cold right in front of me. I mean, he's just a violent guy who his nickname is War Chisora, and he's a guy who comes to war every single time he's in there. Granted, he's getting a little older, so he doesn't have the gas tank to, say, bring that kind of pace all the rounds, especially at heavyweight. It's kind of hard. I believe he'd probably come in a little bit lighter at times, so he doesn't really, he's not fat, but I'd say, it doesn't help his stamina to come in a little bit on the slightly rotund side, So he comes in and he's got the mentality of a warrior. He comes to war, and he's kind of, I notice he always starts out fast, and I remember he started out fast against Alexander Usyk as well, and kind of troubled him, I thought, early before Usyk settled in, and Chisora couldn't maintain that level and pace, right? So again, with Chisora, he comes at it in spots. He'll throw a bunch of winging shots in combination. Heavyweights are not as mobile. Parker, in his own right, is a mobile heavyweight, but still, for a heavyweight, he's mobile. So he's still kind of stationary. And Chisora will wing shots and throw those shots and wing combinations, and he'll put you into some trouble, even if you don't land clean. And Parker's got a great defense. He's very, very nimble. He's very, very calm on the inside. But a guy who throws these violent punches in combination still has to keep you busy, still keeps you alert. You still got to figure out ways to block and slip at close range and counter and whatnot. Landing the better shots, he was in the end, he deserved to win the fight. But Chisora, he made it a good fight. He's always in an exciting fights, and by doing this, he keeps himself relevant and he keeps his name among the heavyweight opponents. Because at this point, you're not going to mistake Chisora for a guy who can win the heavyweight title, but you'll never mistake him for a boring fighter either. Chisora keeps his name relevant by getting in with these top guys who will compete for world titles, like Parker, like Usyk, later on winning the heavyweight championship, and giving them a good tussle, a good fight, and making the fight TV friendly for all of us, Chisora, I feel like he's getting better as he gets older, but he's getting older. So he doesn't have the same capacity lung-wise. He doesn't have the same stamina as he might have when he was a little younger, So sort of a paradox here. He's getting better, but he's getting older. So he doesn't have, I wonder if he'd have more energy if he was youthful, but if he was this good, how much further he might be able to go. But he's good enough. Despite his age, he's good enough and has that warrior-like mentality enough to keep fights exciting, even though he comes up short against these top guys. Call him a gatekeeper? I don't know. I think that's a little harsh. He's probably a guy who, outer top 10, maybe just outside the top 10, maybe a 10, maybe. I don't know. I don't have my heavyweight rankings all panned in my head, but I think he's a fun fight no matter who he fights. Whoever you put Derek Chisora in, no matter what heavyweight it is in the world, I think he's fun. Maybe it's an exception of Fury, who I think also has actually beat him. Fury might be the only one that's just too good and might not even make it exciting. But other than that, I think Chisora is a fun heavyweight. I think Parker is a cerebral boxer, but against the right opponent like Chisora will be in fun fights, because Parker still has the fight mentality in him despite being a cerebral fighter. You got to put the right opponent in there with him. And for that reason, Derek Chisora was the right opponent. And for that reason, Joseph Parker versus Derek Chisora 2 is my number 4 fight for 2021. My number 3 fight for 2021 is Stephen Fulton against Brandon Figueroa. Both of these guys are starting to really appear on the world-class level. You can kind of tell with their youth and their skill and determined mentality, they're probably going to be around for a while at this world-class level. Very good fighters. And you could kind of see that they were heading in on a head-on collision soon. Both being with the same promotional banner, both being in the same weight class, and both being very good fighters. Fulton, to me, always coming into the fight, was always the more skilled fighter. But Figueroa, a little bit like his brother already. You know what I'm saying? We've already seen Figueroa's brother prior to Brandon coming on the rise and coming onto the scene. His older brother was also the same way, a rugged guy who, at first glance, you look at him and say, oh, I'm not that skilled. He's kind of just rugged. But then when you look at him really much closer, you know, you see these subtle things that they do on the inside. And both brothers kind of fight the same way. And Brandon sort of does these things as well. And they figure out a way they make space on the inside when you think there's no space. And when they create that space, they throw those punches and make it rough on you. And you yourself, you think that you're on the inside, you're going to be in a clinch and you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be able to take a rest from the combination. And instead they find the space to force you to fight. And on top of that, they're hitting you, you know, and they're making it rough and they're bringing a pace that suddenly becomes uncomfortable. Stephen Fulton, I thought going into the fight, looks the more clean, clean-cut, sharp fighter. But you always knew Brandon Figueroa was going to bring something a little bit more to the table as well, and he wasn't going to leave it to be that clean for Fulton, like the way it had been for Fulton thus far in his career, who, you know, he'd shown himself to be a real phenom of a fighter. And that's how the fight kind of unfolded. It ended up being a close fight, a lot of action, you know, a style clash nonetheless, but a style clash that really morphed and meshed well between two very good fighters. I'd love to see a rematch of this fight. You know, there was a little bit of controversy. Some people thought Brandon Figueroa won. Stephen Fulton ended up getting the decision, but it was a really, really good fight. And between two young fighters where I think, because they're young and because the fight was so good, I think this could develop into easily a rematch, possibly even a trilogy. I hope to see it again. But looking back on 2021, Stephen Fulton versus Brandon Figueroa is my number 3 fight of 2021. My number 2 fight for 2021 is Juan Francisco Estrada against Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. And these two guys have a rivalry. It is a big rivalry. Gonzalez won the first fight. This was their rematch. Won the first fight about a decade ago when he was on his rise and he was becoming fast on his way to becoming the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, which he would end up becoming. Chocolatito has since lost to Rungsai, the Thai fighter, and he got knocked off the pedestal as a pound-for-pound top fighter in the sport. But he still remained relevant and he still remained at a very high level. Juan Francisco Estrada, in the meantime, has also remained at a high level. Both guys have been championship-level fighters. Both guys have been among the best in the sport. So going into this rematch, you started to think, okay, there's more momentum on Estrada's side now after Gonzalez took those losses against Rungsai. But man, oh man, this is why we fight the fights in the ring and we don't just fight them on paper. What a fight. You had the nice style clash of, you know, Estrada seemed to be the one fighting a little bit more in retreat, picking his spots really nicely. Chocolatito was bringing the fight, but in a skillful way. It wasn't one of these fights where, you know, one guy's boxing, one guy's banging, and there's only skill being shown on one guy while the other guy's just very determined. It was determination and skill. It was shown by both guys, but in their own little styles. In the end, Estrada got the close nod. Chocolatito, I believe they thought that he was thinking he won the fight. As a matter of fact, they're actually going to fight again. They're scheduled to fight in March of this year. So we're actually going to see the trilogy happen. And this is one of those fights where you probably don't want to miss it. These two guys, style-wise, they don't clash at all. I mean, they clash in a good way. They don't clash in a bad way. And I think you're always going to see a good fight when you put these two guys in the ring. I think I'm very curious to see who comes out on top in the third fight. I believe the second fight was won by Quadras by a split decision or majority decision. So it was close. It was exciting. Both guys threw well over 2,000 punches in this fight. I mean, granted, they're smaller guys. They're typically busier. But these guys, you know, it's not like they're not power punchers. I've seen both guys score some pretty good knockouts in their careers. So the fact that they're able to throw this many punches and hit each other and remain, you know, they fought the fight at a pretty good distance from each other. It wasn't like it was a fight where it was paced out and one guy's moving around too much and the fight had breaks. I didn't think the fight had very many breaks in between exchanges, you know, and obviously the amount of punches they were able to throw together kind of speaks for itself. Super exciting fight. Juan Francisco Estrada defeats Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. You're not going to want to miss the third fight. I know I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be in March. But that is my number 2 fight of 2021. Juan Francisco Estrada edges Roman Gonzalez in their rematch. On to the third fight for these two. And you're not going to get a bad fight when you put those two guys in the ring. On to the next one. My number 1 fight of 2021. And this is a number 1 fight, not just because it was exciting, but also because it was a fight that was talked about a lot going into it, not just by boxing fans, but by fans all over. This fight kind of transcended the sport. There are great fights. that we watch as boxing fans, and unfortunately, it's only us boxing fans that kind of know about them, and then we know they're going to be great fights even going in sometimes, but we're the only ones watching them. But the reason I pick this fight, and it's the third fight between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, the rivalry-ending fight, is because it was a great fight, but it was also a fight that everybody was looking forward to. Not just boxing fans, but non-boxing fans as well. Casuals, and even just casual for casuals, you know, just guys who never watch boxing, and you know what, they hear about a fight they should watch, and that's the one they were going to watch, you know. So it became for me the top fight because it lived up to the hype. A lot of times these kind of fights don't live up to the hype. You know, how many times do we get a fight where casuals and non-boxing fans tune in, and we have a chance as boxing, you know, the sport of boxing and its fans, to let people, you know, become fans of the sport. We hope that this fight lives up to the expectation so that these new fans that are watching only for this night want to watch more fights. And how many times we get a dud in those kind of fights? Happens more times than we like to think, right? So this one was not one of those fights. We end up, you know what? Going into the fight, I had the inkling. I had said this was always going to be Deontay's problem in this fight. He can't fight going backwards. Maybe he'll take a half step back and counter you or whatnot. You know, he'll take a half step back to set this is for that 1-2 or for that right hand. Other than that, if you back him up consistently, he's got a problem. And I felt like Tyson Fury, at the end of the first fight, realized this, and he said this in an interview, and then I kind of got mad at myself for not realizing this myself, because usually I catch these little subtleties. But I remember going into the second fight, after the second fight, they asked him, not inside the ring, but later on, they asked him, when did you know you were going to knock out Deontay Wilder? And he said, round 12 of fight number 1, I knew I was going to knock him out. And I thought, he's just, you know, showing some bravado now because he won by knockout in the rematch. And they said, well, how did you know? Well, his explanation was key. It actually made me think, man, why didn't I catch that? Why didn't I notice that? Tyson Fury said, when I was down in round 12, I got up and I was hurt. I had no other choice. If I started backing up and running, he was going to knock me out. I had no other choice but to stand my ground and fight him off of me. And then by fighting him off of me, I started to realize one thing. You know, that's the way you fight Deontay Wilder. You know, you get in his face and you punch him and you back him up. And suddenly, I won the rest of the round, he said. You know, and I went back to my corner, this is quoting Tyson Fury, and I said, make the rematch, I'm going to knock this guy out in the rematch. And when he said that, I was like, you know what, he's right. Because then he came out in fight number 2, and I didn't expect him to come out aggressive, even though he was saying he was going to be aggressive in fight number 2. And he said, and he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He came out aggressive, went right at Deontay Wilder, and beat him from pillar to post. I mean, that was a one-sided beating. And honestly, we didn't think we were going to get a rematch after that. You know, we thought, okay, most people thought Fury won the first fight, but now he dismantled him in the second fight. Everybody was looking at the Fury-Joshua fight. Everybody wanted that fight to happen. Most people were talking about that. And so when we ended up getting the forced third fight due to the court fighting of Deontay Wilder's team, they had the rematch clause, I don't know, something. I don't remember the exact problems, but in the end, Wilder ended up forcing Fury to fight the third fight. Most people were complaining about it, let's face it, because we thought, you know, what do we have to see in this fight? We want to see Fury and Joshua. It would have been probably the biggest fight in the UK history, to tell you the truth. We didn't get it. Maybe our expectations dwindled a little bit. I don't know. You know, then the Fury pulls out. There's all kinds of things. You know, Deontay Wilder fans were saying, oh, he's scared. He doesn't really have COVID because Fury pulled out with COVID. Oh, he didn't really have COVID. He showed up at some other fight. He was there in person the same night, and he didn't have COVID. He's just scared. As if at this level anybody's scared of each other. That was pretty moronic, guys. If you were one of those people that you were thinking that, you're a moron. But anyway, we're going to continue on with the conversation. We got to the third fight, and man, to tell you the truth, I think we got more than we bargained for, all of us. It was a great, great fight. And I say fight because that's what it was. It diminished itself. You know, it started out maybe as a skilled fight. You know, these two guys are skilled guys, but it just ended up becoming an all-out fight. And I think that it became like this, personally speaking, because both guys came in too heavy. Deontay put on more muscle, but he was never a guy who had great stamina. Now he put on more muscle. Those legs have to carry around that extra weight. You look great. I gotta be honest, Deontay looked great at the weight. You know, he put on more muscle, he put on more weight. He looked great at the weight, but you're still, when you think about stamina, now you have to consider the fact that you're gonna be carrying around this extra weight on you the entire time. And Fury, honestly, you know, Fury's never the most aesthetically pleasing fighter to look at, you know. He actually makes the dad bod stylistic, you know, because he's every father's dream. I mean, he's out there with a dad bod and he's kicking ass. He's the best heavyweight in the world, and he doesn't care whether he shows up with a dad bod or not. He looks like a guy who gets into fights in a barroom brawl and he kicks the shit out of everybody. It's crazy, you know, and that's what he did. Honestly, on fight night, he did that once again. Fury went down first, you know, and I think here's the problem. Fury, being a bit heavier, couldn't be as nimble. You know, I knew he was going to be aggressive because he worked so well in the second fight. And he said he was going to be aggressive again in the third fight. I think once you realize that Deontay can't fight backing up, you start taking it to him. But I think his ability to take it to him, he couldn't take it to him at as fast of a pace because he was heavier now. And it ended up costing him. He gets dropped. I believe it was round 2 or 3. I remember, no, I think it was round 3 he got dropped. And you're thinking, wow, you know, oh man, Deontay's got him. Deontay, you know, that was really close ending. I think one of the knockdowns he got up at 9. But then in the next round, it's Fury who drops Wilder. And this fight is just diminishing itself into an all-out brawl. Great for crossover fans, great for non-boxing fans, because, you know, they don't understand really the skill level of boxing anyway. So if you've got 2 world-class fighters who are now a little bit below their best level, and I think both guys, because they showed up heavier, were a little bit below their best level. Now they're starting to fight more than they're starting to fight in a skillful way. They're just starting to fight. But you got to the halfway point and it started to become a consistent thing now. I think the competitive part of Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3 ended at the halfway point. Sure, it went into the 11th round, I believe, went into the later rounds when Fury finally got the knockout. But from about the 6th round on, you can see the consistency of Wilder backing up and Fury walking him down. Wilder backing up and Fury walking him down. And Fury just didn't have the energy to finish him off. You felt like he was on the edge of finishing him off a couple of times, and then he would just kind of end up on top of Wilder on the ropes, and he couldn't put that last combination together. And then Wilder would get himself back together, and he'd become dangerous here and there, but not consistently enough to really, you know, win too many consistent rounds. In the end, it ended up being a bad knockout, a strong knockout, an emphatic knockout for Tyson Fury. But you know what? All the things that Deontay Wilder said, he'd gotten on some people's nerves. Personally, I didn't like the disrespect he'd shown from Mark Breland. But in the end, he did live up to his words. You know, he said he wanted to go out on his shield. He didn't want anybody stopping the fight when he fights. And he proved to be a man of that. You know, he proved that. When he was suffering, because let's face it, the second half of that fight, Deontay was suffering. He was exhausted. He couldn't turn the fight around. He could not prevent Fury from backing him up anymore, but he didn't quit. He kept showing up each and every round, trying. And a couple of times, even in those middle to late rounds, he had a couple of moments where you started to see, oh, can he turn it around? But then he wouldn't be able to. He didn't have enough. And Fury kept taking it to him. So you got to give credit to Wilder for, you know, living up to his words, staying on, not only talking it, but actually walking it as well. And he went on the shield. He got knocked out badly. Fury cemented himself as the best heavyweight in the world. But, man, what a fight. What a fight. Deontay, for all his stubbornness, fought in that stubborn fashion. And for that, he gets credit. But Tyson Fury is the best heavyweight in the world. And that is my #1 fight for 2021. Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3.